My name is Rowena, and I'm 42 years old, and I'll never forget the Christmas when my family pretended I didn't exist. Christmas had always been my season. Not because it was perfect, not because it was filled with grand gifts or lavish trips, but because it was the one time of year when my parents managed to gather everyone under one roof. My childhood memories glowed with strings of colored lights, the smell of cinnamon and cloves, my mother humming carols while my father carved the roast. After my parents passed away, I tried to carry on the tradition. It felt like the least I could do, keep the family together, honor the values they raised us with. Every December, I opened my home, strung up lights, and cooked until my back ached. And every December, I told myself it would be worth it if my siblings, cousins, and their families could come together as we once did. But something had changed. Over the years, I had started to notice the way conversations hushed when I walked into the room, the way eyes slid past me at the dinner table, the way jokes were cracked at my expense, thinly disguised as teasing. I told myself I was being sensitive. That family loved me in their own way. That maybe, just maybe, I was imagining the distance. That illusion shattered one Christmas night. The house was full, laughter bouncing off the walls, the tree glittering in the corner. I had spent hours preparing the meal, arranging the table, polishing the glasses until they sparkled in the candlelight. As the plates were cleared and the wine was poured, I felt the familiar ache of exhaustion in my bones. But I also felt something else, a quiet pride. I stood, raising my glass. It was a tradition my father had always led, a toast to family and to the year ahead. It felt right for me to continue it, to honor his memory. The chatter around the table buzzed on, forks scraped plates. My niece giggled at something her brother whispered. No one noticed me standing there. With my glass lifted, I cleared my throat softly. "I'd like to say a few words," I began. My voice barely registered over the din. My sister leaned in toward her husband, laughing at some private joke. My brother poured himself another glass of wine, sloshing it onto the tablecloth. My cousin scrolled through her phone, the glow of the screen lighting her face. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," I said louder, my smile faltering. "It means so much to keep this tradition alive, to remember Mom and Dad and still nothing." A few eyes glanced my way, bored, then slid away. No one lifted their glass, no one echoed my words. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks as I stood frozen, glass trembling in my hand. The room felt suddenly too loud, their laughter shrill, their conversations sharp. I forced a laugh, lowering my glass as if I hadn't really meant it, as if I hadn't been holding on to those words for weeks. Inside, something cracked. I sank back into my chair, staring at the tablecloth. I could still hear my father's voice from years ago, strong and clear. "To family, because without them, we're nothing." Back then, every glass had risen in unison, every voice had joined in. Now, I might as well have been invisible. I poked at my food, swallowing around the lump in my throat. My hands were still shaking, and I prayed no one noticed. But of course, they didn't. They didn't see me at all. It wasn't just a toast they ignored that night. It was me. I smiled mechanically when someone passed me a dish. I nodded at conversations I wasn't invited into. I laughed at jokes I wasn't part of. I played my role, the quiet, dependable one who kept the house warm, the food hot, the traditions alive. The one who could be counted on to work in the background while everyone else enjoyed themselves. But as I sat there, I realized something I had spent years avoiding. I wasn't valued. I was used. The holiday I had once cherished now, it felt like a performance, and I was nothing more than stage crew while everyone else basked in the spotlight. That night, when the last guest left and the house fell silent, I gathered the wine glasses alone. My fingers ached, my shoulders stiff. But it was nothing compared to the heaviness in my chest. I carried the glasses to the sink, set them down, and gripped the counter to steady myself. My reflection in the window caught my eye, tired, hollow, eyes too red from holding back tears. And for the first time, I admitted the truth out loud, my voice barely a whisper in the empty kitchen. "They don't see me." The words echoed back in the silence, chilling in their finality. But that Christmas, their silence cut deeper than ever before. I could still feel the glass trembling in my hand, still hear my own voice faltering as I spoke words no one cared to hear. What should have been a moment of unity had turned into a private humiliation. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself maybe they hadn't heard me over the noise. Maybe they were too caught up in their conversations. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. But no matter how I twisted it, the truth remained. They had chosen not to listen. It wasn't just rudeness, it was dismissal. I thought back to my father's toasts. Strong and commanding. He wasn't a perfect man, but when he raised his glass, people listened. He spoke with warmth, with authority, with love that demanded respect. And respect was always given. So why, when I raised my glass, had they refused to acknowledge me? I remembered the smirks I'd caught on my brother's children's faces, the way my sister had leaned in to whisper to her husband as though my words were background noise. My cousin tapping at her phone instead of looking me in the eye. It wasn't that they didn't hear me. It was that they didn't see me. And that realization burned more than anything. Over the following days, I carried the weight of that moment with me like an invisible stone pressing on my chest. At the grocery store, I caught myself staring at families laughing together in the aisles, wondering if those mothers felt seen, if those children respected the hands that kept their homes running. At work, I buried myself in tasks, avoiding the pitying glances from my colleagues who had heard the story secondhand through family gossip. Because, of course, my humiliation had been shared. My sister, in her ever-condescending way, had apparently told others how poor Rowena had tried to make a speech and got all emotional when no one noticed. I overheard it when I stopped by her house later that week. She didn't even bother lowering her voice when she told her friend. That cut deeper than the toast itself. It wasn't just that they ignored me, it was that they mocked me for even trying. One evening, I sat in my living room staring at the Christmas tree, still glowing faintly though the season had passed. The ornaments my parents had collected dangled from the branches, my father's wooden nutcracker, my mother's delicate glass angel, the painted bauble I had made in kindergarten with glitter still clinging unevenly to its surface. These were treasures, memories, symbols of the love and effort poured into this family. And yet the people I had tried so hard to hold together treated me like a footnote. I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it toward the tree, whispering into the empty room, to family. But the words felt hollow, a mockery of what they used to mean. The humiliation of that ignored toast gnawed at me, but beneath the sting was something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. I wasn't an afterthought. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just the woman who scrubbed dishes and strung lights so everyone else could have their picture-perfect holiday. I mattered. The thought took root slowly, stubbornly, like a seed breaking through hard soil. The more I replayed the scene, the more the humiliation transformed. It wasn't weakness anymore, it was fuel. Because in that moment, when my family chose to ignore me, they showed me who they really were. And I finally saw the truth. I had been giving them everything, my time, my energy, my traditions, while they gave me nothing in return. They believed they could take without giving, mock without consequence, dismiss without guilt. But they were wrong. I set my empty glass down on the table and whispered again, this time with steel in my voice. Enough. I didn't know what form my stand would take yet. I didn't know how I would force them to see me, to acknowledge me. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never stand in that dining room again with a trembling glass and let them make me invisible. The first crack in the family's hold over me had appeared during that toast. And cracks, once they start, only spread. That's when I decided enough was enough. It wasn't the first time they had dismissed me. That Christmas toast was just the loudest echo of a silence I had been hearing my entire life. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the dismissal had been there for years, lurking in small moments that I brushed off, convincing myself they didn't matter. But they did. They always had. When I was a girl, I was the middle child, the one easy to overlook. My older brother, Felix, was the golden boy, praised for every half-hearted achievement. My younger sister, Clarissa, was the darling, spoiled by her sweetness and charm. I was steady, responsible, the one who could be counted on to keep secrets, to do chores, to stay out of the way. Back then, I thought being dependable was enough, that if I held everything together, my family would appreciate me. But appreciation never came. It continued into adulthood. Felix went into finance. Clarissa married well, and both wore their success like crowns at every gathering. I, on the other hand, stayed behind. I cared for our parents when they grew sick. I managed the house, paid the bills, made sure traditions carried on when everyone else was too busy. And yet, when people praised the family, whose names did they mention? Felix, with his new promotion. Clarissa, with her beautiful children. Never Rowena, with her steady sacrifices. I remembered one Thanksgiving, years ago. I had spent 3 days cooking, cleaning, preparing. As we sat down to eat, Felix raised his glass to thank Clarissa for hosting such a beautiful meal. The room erupted in cheers, everyone clapping, glasses raised high. Clarissa smiled graciously while sitting at my table, eating my food, surrounded by decorations I had hung. I sat there, invisible, my hands still aching from kneading dough and scrubbing pans. Clarissa didn't correct him. She simply accepted the praise as if it belonged to her. Then there was the summer reunion when our aunt praised Felix for taking such good care of your parents before they passed. I had opened my mouth to correct her, but Felix's smug little smile stopped me. He didn't deny it. He let the lie live. And no one looked at me, the daughter who had spent nights sleeping in hospital chairs, the woman who had emptied her savings to cover medications. Moments like these piled up, one on top of the other, until my shoulders bowed beneath the weight of them. And yet, every year, I kept giving. Every Christmas, I hosted. I cooked the meals, decorated the tree, hung the stockings. I wrapped gifts for my nieces and nephews, watching their faces light up with joy. And every year, my efforts were chalked up as expected. No gratitude. No acknowledgement. Just the unspoken assumption that Rowena would handle it because she always did. That was my role. The background character, the caretaker, the one who kept the lights on and the memories alive while everyone else played at being the star. I told myself it was worth it, that one day, they would see me. That one day, someone would raise a glass and say, "To Rowena, who made this possible." But that day never came. Instead, they grew bolder in their dismissal. My sister's children rolled their eyes when I asked them to help set the table. My brother's wife whispered to Clarissa that my house felt old-fashioned, as if it were a museum rather than a home. And when I spoke, when I dared to raise my voice during gatherings, it was drowned out by louder ones. The ignored toast wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of years of practice. They had trained themselves not to hear me. And maybe I had trained them too. I had allowed it. I had smiled through it. I had bitten my tongue and kept working, hoping quiet endurance would earn me respect. But endurance doesn't earn respect. It breeds entitlement. That realization hit me harder than I expected. The Christmas toast was humiliating, yes. But it was also liberating, because in that one moment, the truth crystallized. My family didn't value me. Not my voice, not my sacrifices, not my presence. I thought of my father again, the way his voice had commanded a room. He had always said, "Respect is something you claim, not something you wait for." And I realized I had been waiting my whole life. No more. I would not spend another holiday slaving away only to be ignored. I would not allow myself to be the invisible caretaker while others basked in the glow. If my family wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, then they were about to learn just how much I did. I sat by the dying Christmas tree late that night, my heart pounding with clarity. The needles crumbled beneath my fingers as I touched the branches, brittle and sharp, like my resolve. They thought I was invisible. They thought they could ignore me forever. They thought wrong. This time, though, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Christmas had always been sacred to me. Long before it became a source of humiliation, Christmas was magic. My parents, Harold and Isabel, believed the holiday wasn't about gifts, but about togetherness. The smallest details mattered to them, not the price tags, not the grandeur, but the love woven into each tradition. I remember my mother waking before dawn to start the cinnamon rolls, her humming filling the kitchen as she rolled dough with flour dusting her cheeks. My father would wrestle the pine tree through the front door, needles scattering across the floor as he laughed at the mess. "A good tree always makes a mess," he'd say, winking at me. When night came, we'd gather in the living room. Dad lit a fire, Mom served cocoa, and one by one, we'd hang ornaments that each told a story. My first-grade angel made from pipe cleaners, Felix's football ornament, though he quit the team after one season. Clarissa's porcelain ballerina, a gift from a doting aunt. None of it matched, but together it formed a patchwork of family history. And then, always, came the toast. Dad would raise his glass high, his voice steady but warm. "To family," he'd say. And everyone would echo it. Glasses clinking, eyes bright. For that brief moment, no matter the squabbles or stress of the year, we were one. When my parents passed, I thought continuing those traditions would be my way of keeping them alive. I made the cinnamon rolls, wrestled the tree, kept every mismatched ornament. I believed that if I worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, I could preserve the magic. But what I got instead was exploitation. The year after Dad died, I hosted my first Christmas alone. I remember how nervous I was, how carefully I decorated the tree, how I set the table with his favorite china. Everyone came, of course. They ate the food, admired the decorations, took pictures by the fire. But when I tried to lead the toast, voices spoke over me. Someone joked about Felix's promotion, someone else laughed at Clarissa's dress, and I was drowned out. I told myself it was grief, that everyone was just struggling to adjust without Dad. But the pattern repeated. Every year, I shouldered the work, yet every year, my voice mattered less. My siblings arrived expecting to be served, my cousins treating my house like a backdrop for their photos. They praised each other endlessly, but never once acknowledged the hands that strung the lights, the heart that made it possible. The more I tried to honor tradition, the more they twisted it into entitlement. They wanted the cinnamon rolls, but not the woman who baked them. They wanted the tree, but not the one who carried it through the door. They wanted the toast, but not the voice delivering it. I would sit at the table, staring at the ornaments on the tree, aching for the warmth of the past. In those moments, it felt like I was trying to keep a fire alive with wet matches. One memory returned to me vividly as I reflected after that humiliating Christmas. It was from when I was 12. Dad had given me the honor of leading the toast for the first time. My hands shook as I held the glass, my voice small but determined. Everyone had cheered, clapped even, making me feel like the most important person in the world. That little girl had believed her voice mattered, that one day, she would grow into a woman respected by her family. Now, 42 years old, I realized that little girl had been lied to by circumstance. My parents had valued me, but the rest? They valued only what I could give. And in trying so hard to keep their traditions alive, I had allowed them to strip those traditions of meaning. They weren't sacred anymore. They were transactions. They took my labor, my home, my devotion, and in exchange, they gave me silence. That thought sat heavy in my chest, but it also sharpened me. Because sacred things aren't meant to be trampled. And if my family couldn't treat Christmas with the respect it deserved, then maybe it was time to remind them who held the reins. I stood by the window that night, looking at the tree lit up against the dark. Each ornament glowed softly, whispering stories of the past. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, my reflection staring back at me older now, stronger, no longer willing to be invisible. If my father were here, he wouldn't have let them disrespect me. He wouldn't have let them mock the traditions he built. He would have said, in that booming voice of his, "Respect is earned, but it must also be demanded." And for the first time, I understood. I had been giving them everything, asking for nothing, and they had taken that as permission to take even more. But Christmas wasn't their holiday to exploit. It was mine to protect. I realized they weren't honoring tradition, they were exploiting me. The humiliation of that ignored toast stayed with me. It clung to me like smoke after a fire, slipping into every corner of my life. Even weeks later, I'd wake in the night replaying the moment, the weight of the glass in my hand, the hollow silence that followed. Their laughter had been loud enough to drown me out, but the silence that fell when I stopped speaking, that was deafening. Every time I thought of it, my stomach twisted. I had stood there vulnerable, offering words from the heart, and they treated me like background noise. The same family I had fed, sheltered, and held together couldn't give me 30 seconds of respect. In the days after Christmas, I went through the motions. I cleaned up the decorations, boxed the ornaments, swept up pine needles that clung stubbornly to the rug. My hands moved, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying years of small slights that had led to this breaking point. Felix bragging about his bonuses while sneering at my modest life. Clarissa laughing about how I was so old-fashioned for hosting dinners instead of booking fancy restaurants. Cousins whispering that I had nothing going on except keeping up a house too big for me. And still, I had cooked. Still, I had decorated. Still, I had smiled through it all, but no more. That toast was the line in the sand. I realized then that my family didn't just dismiss me, they depended on my silence. They assumed I'd always endure, always host, always swallow the hurt for the sake of appearances. They thought I was weak. That thought simmered in me like an ember. And slowly, the ember turned to flame. One night, after the tree had been dragged out to the curb and the last box of ornaments tucked away, I sat alone in the study. The desk lamp cast a golden glow across the room, highlighting stacks of papers I had ignored for too long. Old files, sealed envelopes, documents my parents had left behind after their passing. I hadn't looked at them in years. At the time, grief had made the words blur together, and I shoved them into a drawer to deal with someday. But now, with humiliation still raw in my chest, I reached for them. The first folder I opened held bank statements and utility bills, boring details of a household once run by my parents. But as I shuffled through the pile, something caught my eye. A manila envelope marked in my father's familiar handwriting. To Rowena. For safekeeping. My breath caught. I traced the letters with trembling fingers before carefully breaking the seal. Inside were crisp, official-looking documents. I scanned the first page, my eyes widening as the words sank in. Deed. Ownership. Shares. I read them again, slower this time, my pulse quickening. My parents hadn't left everything to be divided equally, as I had always assumed. No, this house, the very one my family dismissed as mine in name only, was legally and solely mine. And more than that, hidden among the papers were documents confirming my controlling stake in the small family business my father had started decades ago. I leaned back in my chair, the papers trembling in my hands. My siblings didn't know. Or if they did, they had chosen to ignore it, hoping I'd never uncover the truth. I thought back to their smugness, their laughter, their arrogance as they treated me like an afterthought in my own home. All the while, they believed themselves powerful because they assumed I had none. But they were wrong. I had been holding the power all along. A slow, bitter laugh escaped me. Here I was, sitting alone in the study, nursing wounds from a toast they ignored, while the very foundation of their comfort rested in my hands. The house they gathered in every year belonged to me. The business they bragged about at dinners built on my father's name was under my control. The irony was almost too much to bear. I closed my eyes and imagined my father's voice, steady and commanding. Respect must be demanded, Rowena. Never forget that. He had left me more than property. He had left me a weapon. The humiliation I felt began to twist into something new. Not shame, not sadness, but resolve. The next Christmas would be different. I pictured it. The family gathered, the tree glowing, the chatter filling the room. I would raise my glass again, not as the invisible caretaker but as the woman who held everything they took for granted. And this time, when they ignored me, I would not falter, because I wouldn't be alone. I knew then what I had to do. I would call a lawyer. I would gather every document, every signature, every proof of my authority. And when the moment came, I would not be dismissed. The thought filled me with a quiet fire. They wanted me silent, invisible, forgotten, but they had underestimated me for the last time. And then I remembered the papers locked away in my desk. The papers were more powerful than any words I could have spoken. The morning after I found the manila envelope, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the documents spread out before me. The deed to the house. Certificates for business shares. Legal statements signed by my father years ago. Each page was a reminder that I wasn't just the woman holding this family together. I was the one holding all the cards. But I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't know how to interpret every clause or phrase. My parents had been careful, yes, but the language was dense, full of words that curled around themselves like barbed wire. If I wanted to understand the full extent of what they had entrusted to me, I needed help. That's how I found myself walking into the office of Jameson and Price, attorneys at law, a week later. The receptionist led me into a small room lined with shelves of thick books. At the center sat Mr. Alden Jameson, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and a kind, steady gaze. His reputation was well known in town, sharp as a blade but fair, with a voice that carried weight in any courtroom. I slid the envelope across his desk. "These belong to my parents," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to know what they mean." He put on his glasses and leafed through the documents with practiced hands. For several long minutes, the only sound in the room was the rustle of paper. I studied his expression, trying to read each flicker of his brow, each purse of his lips. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at me. "Mrs. Rowena, your parents were very deliberate. This house is solely yours, no shared ownership, no conditions. And these," he tapped the business certificates, "make you the majority shareholder of the family company. Your brother and sister may hold smaller shares, but you hold controlling interest. That means, legally, nothing can be decided without your approval." The words settled over me like a warm cloak. For years, I had been invisible. Now, the truth was undeniable. I was the one with authority. Mr. Jameson leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Have you shared this information with your family?" I shook my head. "No. They treat me like I don't matter. They assume they run everything. I let them believe it." His eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "Then it's time to stop letting them. You don't need to boast, Mrs. Rowena. The law is on your side. If they challenge you, you have the documents to prove it. And if you wish, I'll stand beside you." I felt something shift in me then, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifting off my shoulders. For so long, I had believed I had no voice, no power. But here it was, written in ink, backed by law, ready to be wielded. I left his office with the documents carefully tucked into a folder, my hands trembling not with fear but with anticipation. That night, I spread the papers across my desk again, this time with new eyes. I traced my father's signature, steady and confident. He had known what he was doing. He had known I would need protection. And he had given it to me. I imagined the next Christmas, the family gathered as always, their chatter drowning me out, their laughter cutting into me. And then, I imagined the silence when the lawyer raised his glass, his voice commanding the room, forcing them to see what they had ignored for years. For the first time, I smiled at the thought of Christmas. Not with dread, not with resignation, but with something sharper. Purpose. In the weeks that followed, I prepared quietly. I kept the documents secure, met with Mr. Jameson again to clarify details, and rehearsed in my mind how the moment might unfold. I didn't need to humiliate them, I just needed to remind them who I was. Every time Felix bragged about managing family business affairs, I bit back a laugh, knowing he was building castles on sand. Every time Clarissa scoffed at my little traditions, I smiled, knowing the roof over her head during those gatherings was mine. They had dismissed me. For years. But this time, when I raised my glass, I wouldn't stand alone. The papers had given me more than authority. They had given me my voice back. The next Christmas would not end in silence. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a plan. I carried the folder home from Mr. Jameson's office like it was made of glass. Every page inside was a weapon, not one I wanted to use recklessly, but one I knew I'd need to wield with precision. My family had mistaken my silence for weakness for too long. Now I finally had proof that silence wasn't weakness at all, it was patience. For weeks I played my part as usual. I went to family dinners, nodded at Felix's bragging, smiled through Clarissa's backhanded compliments. Outwardly, nothing had changed. But inside, a fire burned steady and strong. I listened differently now. When Felix puffed up about how he was keeping the business afloat, I noted how little he knew about the financial reports I now had access to. When Clarissa sneered about my dusty old house, I remembered the deed with my name alone written across it. When cousins rolled their eyes at my sentimental traditions, I thought about how every ornament on that tree was mine to protect, not theirs to mock. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I would never push back. But I knew better. Each evening, after long days of swallowing their dismissals, I returned home to my quiet study and opened the folder. I traced my father's signature, my mother's careful handwriting on notes in the margins. They had seen me, they had trusted me, and they had left me with more than memories, they had left me with power. The more I prepared, the calmer I became. This wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about restoration. About balance. About forcing those who ignored me to finally see what had always been true. Without me, the roof over their heads and the business they bragged about would crumble. Mr. Jameson met with me twice more in the months that followed. He guided me through the paperwork, explained how to assert my rights without letting things spiral into chaos. His calm reassurances steadied me, and his presence alone was a comfort. He was, after all, the man who would stand beside me when the time came. Because I knew exactly when I wanted that time to be. Christmas. The same holiday where they had humiliated me would be the holiday where I took everything back. The symmetry was perfect. They had raised their voices over mine, mocking my attempt to honor tradition. Next time, they wouldn't be able to drown me out, not with a lawyer in the room. Not with legal documents on the table. Not with the truth shining too brightly to be ignored. So I waited. And as I waited, I watched. I watched Felix grow bolder, strutting through family gatherings like a king in borrowed robes. I watched Clarissa sneer when I suggested keeping things simple, insisting her children deserved the best, as if I were a servant meant to provide it. I watched the cousins dismiss my efforts, making jokes about Aunt Rowena's obsession with old rituals. Every word they spoke only sharpened my resolve. But I didn't let my anger show. No. I smiled. I cooked, I nodded. I gave them no reason to suspect what was coming. Let them believe I was still the invisible one, the overlooked caretaker. Let them laugh. Their laughter would make their silence sweeter later. One night in early December, I stood in my living room staring at the glowing tree. The lights reflected off the ornaments, each one a fragment of memory. My father's voice echoed in my mind. Respect is something you claim. I lifted my glass in a private toast. To Mom. To Dad. To the strength you left me. The words didn't tremble this time. They rang steady and strong in the quiet house. I pictured the scene in my mind. The family gathered again, their chatter rising, their dismissive smirks ready. I pictured myself raising my glass, ignored once more. And then I pictured Mr. Jameson stepping forward, his calm, commanding voice silencing the room. That vision carried me through the final weeks before Christmas. The plan was simple, but powerful. I would play the same role as always, hostess, caretaker, the one who worked in the shadows. And then, at the perfect moment, I would hand the floor to the lawyer they didn't expect. I didn't need to shout, I didn't need to beg. I just needed to reveal the truth they had tried to bury under years of dismissal. The thought filled me with a peace I hadn't known in years. For once, I wasn't dreading Christmas. I was counting down the days. All I needed was the right moment to strike. The following Christmas, everything looked the same on the surface. The house glowed with twinkling lights, the tree stood tall in the corner, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted meat filled the air. My hands moved through the familiar motions, checking the oven, straightening the napkins, placing candles in their holders. To anyone else, it looked like the same Rowena preparing for another family gathering, but inside, I was different. This time, every plate I set, every glass I polished, every candle I lit felt like preparation for battle. Not with screaming or chaos, but with silence broken at last. By evening, the family began to arrive. Felix was first, striding in with his booming voice, his wife at his side dripping in jewelry. He hugged me quickly, already launching into a story about some deal he'd closed. He didn't notice the way I nodded absently, my thoughts elsewhere. Clarissa came next, sweeping through the door in a fur coat, her children trailing behind her. She kissed my cheek, whispered that the house looked quaint as ever, and handed me a bottle of wine as though it were a favor. I thanked her politely, though the words caught in my throat like ashes. One by one, cousins and relatives trickled in, filling the house with chatter and laughter. The same scene as every year. They dropped coats on chairs, left shoes in piles by the door, and made themselves at home as though the house owed them something. And I let them. I smiled, I served, I listened. On the surface, nothing had changed. But deep down, I was waiting. Waiting for the moment that had haunted me since last Christmas. Dinner was loud, as always. Felix bragged about his finances, Clarissa complained about her husband's new project, cousins gossiped about people who weren't there. Laughter rose and fell like waves, drowning out any softer voices. I knew this rhythm well, it was the same tide that had swallowed my toast the year before. But I was ready for it this time. As dessert plates were cleared, I stood, smoothing my dress with steady hands. My heart beat faster, but not with fear, with anticipation. I raised my glass. To family, I began. My voice calm but strong. And just like the year before, the room moved on without me. Felix leaned in to pour more wine, Clarissa whispered to her daughter, cousins laughed at some inside joke. The sound rose and rose, washing over my words until they were nothing more than background noise. The humiliation should have stung. But instead, I felt a strange calm. This was exactly what I had expected. I kept my glass raised, my eyes steady on the doorway. Because I wasn't alone this time. A moment later, the door opened, and in stepped Mr. Jameson, his silver hair catching the glow of the chandelier, his presence commanding in a way that made the room falter. Conversations stumbled to a stop as heads turned. He carried himself with quiet authority, a folder tucked under his arm. And though his lips curved in a polite smile, his eyes were sharp, assessing every face at the table. I lowered my glass, my heart steady now. The silence that had once humiliated me now belonged to me. The chatter that had drowned me out had stopped. All eyes were on him. When I stood to raise my glass, history repeated itself. Once again, they ignored me. The chatter rolled over me like thunder, their voices rising in competition, laughter bouncing across the table. Felix leaned back in his chair, gesturing wildly as he told some story about his firm, while Clarissa dabbed at her lipstick with a napkin, whispering something to her eldest daughter. My words dissolved in the noise just as they had the year before. But this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't lower my glass. I didn't sit down with my cheeks burning and my heart crumbling. I waited. And then the front door opened. Mr. Jameson stepped inside, composed as ever, his suit crisp, his silver hair gleaming in the warm light of the chandelier. The air shifted instantly. Conversations faltered, laughter stumbled, and one by one, heads turned toward the unfamiliar figure now standing in the entryway. Felix's brow furrowed. Can we help you?" he asked, his tone carrying the arrogance of a man unaccustomed to being interrupted. But before I could answer, Mr. Jameson spoke, his voice calm but commanding. "Good evening, everyone. Forgive the intrusion, I was invited." He stepped forward, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged anywhere he chose to stand. The folder under his arm looked small, but I knew it held the weight of everything I'd been preparing for. Clarissa's eyes darted to me, confusion flickering across her face. "Rowena? Who is this?" I set my glass down gently and smiled. The kind of smile that comes not from politeness but from certainty. "This," I said evenly, "is Mr. Jameson, my lawyer." A ripple went through the room. Forks clinked against plates. Cousins shifted in their seats. Felix let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Your lawyer? What on earth do you need a lawyer for at Christmas dinner?" Before I could respond, Mr. Jameson moved to the head of the table, resting a hand on the back of my father's old chair. His presence alone commanded silence, but when he lifted his glass, the room froze. "To Rowena," he said firmly, his eyes sweeping across the faces around us. "The rightful keeper of this home, the majority shareholder of your late father's company. The woman you have all too often dismissed, though she has carried the weight of this family on her shoulders." The silence that followed was so profound it felt like the air itself had been sucked from the room. My heart thundered, but my face remained calm. I looked at Felix, whose mouth had dropped open, his glass halfway to his lips. Clarissa's eyes widened, darting between me and the lawyer, as if trying to piece together a puzzle she hadn't realized existed. Cousins exchanged glances, their smirks fading, their laughter long gone. "Mr. Jameson lowered his glass slightly. "I've come tonight because Mrs. Rowena asked me to clarify a few matters that seem to have been misunderstood within this family. Matters regarding ownership, responsibility, and respect." I sat back, watching the realization dawn across their faces. For once I wasn't straining to be heard. For once, I didn't need to shout. I had their full attention. Felix finally found his voice, though it cracked with disbelief. "This is ridiculous. Rowena, what are you doing?" I folded my hands calmly on the table. "I'm doing what I should have done years ago. I'm reminding you who I am." The lawyer opened the folder, the rustle of paper loud in the stillness. "Let's begin, shall we?" And just like that, the balance of power shifted. The family who had ignored me, mocked me, dismissed me, now sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the man who had raised his glass not to them but to me. And then the lawyer walked in. The room fell silent the moment he raised his glass. Mr. Jameson's voice carried the kind of authority that didn't need volume. Even Felix, who never missed a chance to dominate a conversation, closed his mouth with an audible click. Clarissa's children froze mid-giggle, their eyes darting nervously between the lawyer and me. "To Rowena," he repeated, lowering his glass with deliberate calm. "The rightful steward of this home, and the majority shareholder of the family business." I could feel their eyes drilling into me, searching for answers. My palms were warm, my chest tight, but for once, it wasn't fear filling me, it was power. Felix was the first to break. "This has to be some kind of joke." He let out a sharp laugh, though it fell flat in the quiet room. "Rowena, you didn't bring a lawyer here to..." "What? Make yourself feel important?" Jameson didn't even glance at him. Instead, he placed the folder on the table and opened it with precise movements. "No jokes here, Mr. Felix. These are legal documents prepared by your late father and mother. The deed to this house, for example, signed, notarized, and filed properly." He slid the page toward the center of the table, the bold letters catching the light. "It names one owner, and one owner only. Your sister." A murmur rippled through the group. Cousins leaned forward, Clarissa's eyes narrowing as she scanned the page. "That's impossible," Felix snapped, his voice rising. "The house belongs to all of us." Mr. Jameson's eyebrow arched. "Incorrect. You may have been under that impression, but the law doesn't bend to assumptions. It bends to ink on paper, and this deed is quite clear." The silence was deafening. I watched Felix's bravado falter, his hand tightening on his wineglass until his knuckles turned white. Clarissa fidgeted with her napkin, her lips pressed thin, her children staring at her for guidance she didn't have. But Mr. Jameson wasn't finished. "And then there's the matter of the business," he continued, sliding another document onto the table. "Your father made careful provisions. Shares were distributed, yes, but the controlling interest more than half was granted to Rowena. Meaning, in practical terms, No decision of significance can be made without her consent. Clarissa gasped softly. That can't be true. Felix, tell him! Felix sputtered, his face red. I've been running the business, everyone knows that. Indeed, Mr. Jameson said smoothly. But running it and owning it are not the same thing. You've been managing day-to-day matters, Mr. Felix, but legally, you've been doing so under your sister's authority, whether you realized it or not. The weight of his words pressed down on the table like an anvil. For the first time, I saw cracks in Felix's arrogance. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his confidence collapsing under the undeniable truth in black and white. Clarissa's voice shook as she finally spoke. Rowena, why didn't you say anything? All these years, why keep this secret? I met her gaze steadily. Because I didn't think I had to. I thought respect was something that flowed naturally between family. I thought if I kept our traditions alive, if I held us together, you would see me. But you didn't. You saw a servant, a caretaker. Someone you could ignore. The words trembled with old pain, but I held firm. So I let you believe what you wanted. And when you humiliated me last Christmas, when you laughed over my toast as if I weren't even there, I realized it was time to stop hiding. Mr. Jameson closed the folder gently. Your parents left this house and this business to Rowena because they trusted her. They knew she had the steadiness, the responsibility, the loyalty required to carry on what they built. That was their choice, and it was legally binding. The silence stretched again, thick and suffocating. Felix stared at the table. Clarissa dabbed her eyes with a napkin, and cousins shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For years, I had been invisible. Now, every eye in the room was on me, and for once, they weren't dismissing me. They were listening. Their laughter turned to silence in an instant. The shock on their faces was almost comical. For once, my family wasn't laughing, interrupting, or talking over me. They were speechless. The very same people who had drowned out my voice for years now sat frozen in their chairs, eyes darting between Mr. Jameson, the papers on the table, and me. It was Felix, of course, who broke the silence. His pride wouldn't let him sit still. This is outrageous, he barked, slamming his palm against the table. That can't be real. Dad wouldn't do that. He wouldn't put her in charge. His words dripped with disdain, as though my name were a bitter taste in his mouth. Mr. Jameson remained perfectly calm. Your father did precisely that. The documents are clear, and they've been on file with the county for years. If you'd like, I can provide you certified copies directly from the registrar's office. Felix opened his mouth again, but the lawyer's measured tone left no room for argument. He sat back, his jaw tight, his hand gripping his wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. Clarissa, on the other hand, took a different approach. She pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes wide and watery. Rowena, why didn't you tell us? Why let us believe all these years? We could have worked together, shared the responsibility, honored Mom and Dad properly. Her voice shook with practiced sorrow, but I knew her too well. She wasn't mourning, she was scrambling. I leaned forward, my voice steady. I didn't tell you because you never wanted to hear. Whenever I spoke, you ignored me. Whenever I tried to lead, you talked over me. Why would I waste my breath when I knew it would only be drowned out? Clarissa's lips trembled, but she said nothing. One of my cousins, Martin, cleared his throat nervously. Well, maybe there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we just didn't realize how much you were doing. We appreciate you, Rowena. The words rang hollow, like a hastily patched wall already cracking. I turned to him, my gaze sharp. Do you? Did you appreciate me last year when I raised a toast to honor our parents, and not one of you lifted your glass? Did you appreciate me when I cooked meals, decorated this house, and opened my doors year after year, only to be treated like the help? No, Martin. You didn't appreciate me. You took me for granted. A heavy silence followed. No one dared to meet my eyes. Mr. Jameson folded his hands neatly on the folder, his voice cutting through the quiet. Mrs. Rowena has been patient to a fault. She could have asserted her authority years ago, but she chose not to. Instead, she gave you space, hoping you would treat her with respect on your own. Unfortunately, you did not. The words landed like stones. Felix shifted uncomfortably, Clarissa dabbed at her eyes again, and the cousins fidgeted in their seats. For years, I had been invisible. Now, the weight of my presence filled the room. I took a slow breath and let my gaze travel around the table. This house is mine. The business decisions are mine. But more than that, my dignity is mine. And I will not let any of you strip that from me again. Felix muttered something under his breath, but when I raised an eyebrow, he fell silent. Clarissa's children stared at me with wide eyes, their usual smirks gone. For once, I wasn't the quiet one. I wasn't the background. I wasn't the woman whose words were brushed aside. I was the center of the room. And they all knew it. For the first time, I had their full attention. The excuses came pouring out. It was as though a dam had broken. Once the initial silence cracked, voices tumbled over one another in a frantic rush, each relative trying desperately to rewrite history. Clarissa leaned forward, her hands clasped as if in prayer. "Rowena, you have to understand we didn't mean to ignore you. Things just get loud at family gatherings. It wasn't personal." Felix scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Don't feed her that nonsense, Clarissa. This is about power, not respect. She's been sitting on this information for years, and now she's decided to use it to make us look bad." One of the cousins, Elena, spoke quickly, her tone nervous. "We didn't realize how much you were carrying, Rowena. You've always been so strong, so capable. We assumed you didn't mind doing everything." Assumed. That word stung more than they realized. They hadn't asked, hadn't cared, hadn't seen. They had assumed my silence meant contentment, that my endurance meant I needed nothing in return. I let them speak, their excuses filling the room, each one more hollow than the last. My hands were steady, my heartbeat calm. For once, I wasn't scrambling for their approval. I didn't need it. When the noise quieted, I leaned forward, my gaze sharp. "You all have explanations, you all have excuses, but not one of you has an apology." The words hung heavy in the air. Clarissa's mouth opened and closed, her eyes darting away. Felix muttered something about me being overdramatic, but even he couldn't meet my stare. "I have been here," I continued, my voice unwavering. "Every Christmas, every holiday, every gathering. I've cooked, cleaned, hosted, carried this family on my back. And every time I tried to speak, you silenced me. Every time I tried to be seen, you looked the other way. Last Christmas, I raised a glass to honor our parents, and not one of you lifted yours. Not one." The room was silent again. But this silence wasn't dismissive. It was guilty. "You thought I'd keep doing it forever," I said softly. "You thought my silence was weakness, but my silence was patience, and that patience is over." Felix shifted in his seat, his arrogance flickering but not extinguished. "So what now? You throw this in our faces? You cut us out of everything? That's not family, Rowena. That's vindictive." I tilted my head, studying him. "Family doesn't mean enduring abuse. Family doesn't mean sacrificing myself while you laugh in my face. Family is respect. And if you can't give me that, then perhaps you don't deserve the privileges that come with this house or the business." That got their attention. Several cousins straightened in their chairs, eyes widening. Clarissa's children whispered nervously. The weight of consequence began to sink in. Mr. Jameson cleared his throat, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Your sister is not making threats. She is simply stating the reality of her legal position. If she wished, she could restrict access to this property entirely. She could also exercise her authority over the business in ways you may find inconvenient. Fortunately, she is a far more patient woman than most in her position would be." I nodded slightly. "I don't want to tear the family apart. I don't want to erase the traditions our parents built. But I will not be invisible anymore. If you want to sit at this table, if you want to benefit from what Mom and Dad left behind, then you will treat me with respect. No more mocking, no more ignoring, no more silencing." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of realization. They had thought me weak. They had thought me passive. But now they saw the truth. One by one, their eyes fell to the table. No one argued. No one laughed. For the first time in years, my voice didn't just fill the room, it commanded it. This time, their words couldn't drown me out. When the lawyer left, I remained standing. Mr. Jameson gathered his papers, slid them neatly into his folder, and gave me a nod before excusing himself. His presence had been a shield, a steady reminder of the truth. But now it was just me, my family, and the silence he had left behind. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of what had just unfolded hung heavy in the air, thicker than the scent of roasted meat still lingering on the table. Their faces told the story. Felix's pride had curdled into fury. Clarissa's tears had dried into shame. The cousins' smirks had vanished into uneasy stares. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor, and let my eyes sweep across the table. I need to make something very clear, I said, my voice steady but unyielding. Every head turned. This house is not just where we gather. It is where our parents built their lives, where we learned what family was supposed to mean. They entrusted it to me, and I will honor that. But from this moment on, no one will treat me like I'm invisible under this roof. If you want to be here, you will treat me with respect. That is the first rule. Felix opened his mouth, but I raised a hand sharply, cutting him off. The shock on his face nearly made me smile. For once, I was the one silencing him. The second rule, I continued, is that the business our father built will no longer be used as a pedestal for arrogance. It is not your stage, Felix. It is not your trophy. It is our family's legacy, and I hold the controlling interest. Any decisions from this point forward will go through me. If that bothers you, then you're free to step away. His face flushed red, his fists clenched on the table. But he said nothing. I turned my gaze to Clarissa, whose eyes were wet but wary. And you, Clarissa. You've spent years belittling me, laughing at my traditions, treating my efforts as quaint. That ends now. If you want to keep bringing your children here, you'll show them that respect begins at this table. Because I won't allow the next generation to inherit the poison of dismissal and mockery. Her lips trembled. But she nodded faintly. Her children staring at her as if waiting for her to argue. She didn't. Finally, I let my gaze fall on the cousins, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of my stare. You've enjoyed the meals, the decorations, the home I've opened to you, yet you've given nothing in return but laughter at my expense. From now on, if you want to sit at this table, you'll contribute. You'll help set up, clean up, and honor the traditions our parents built. Otherwise, you can spend your holidays elsewhere. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the humiliating silence of being ignored, but the heavy silence of people realizing the ground beneath them had shifted. For once, I wasn't begging for recognition. I was demanding it. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on the table. These are the rules: respect, contribution, dignity. If you cannot abide by them, then you are not welcome here. This is not up for debate. Felix shifted, ready to explode. But one glance from me and the memory of the lawyer's words kept him quiet. Clarissa dabbed at her eyes again, nodding meekly. The cousins whispered among themselves. But no one dared to protest openly. I straightened, letting the weight of my words settle. Our parents built this family on love and respect. I will not let those values rot under arrogance and neglect. You wanted me silent because it was convenient. But those days are over. The tension in the room was thick, but beneath it, I felt something new. Power, control. The dignity I had thought I'd lost forever. And as I looked around the table at the faces that had once ignored me, I realized something else. I didn't need their approval anymore. Whether they stayed or left, I would still stand. Their silence tasted sweeter than any toast I'd ever given. That night, I poured myself one final glass of wine. The house was quiet again, though not in the same way as the year before. This silence wasn't suffocating, born from dismissal and invisibility. It was the silence of control, of peace reclaimed. My family had left earlier than usual, slipping out one by one with subdued voices and downcast eyes. No laughter lingered in the walls. No mocking whispers followed me into the kitchen. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a servant cleaning up after a crowd that barely acknowledged me. I felt like the mistress of my own home, the woman my parents had trusted me to be. I carried the glass into the living room and sat by the tree. The ornaments sparkled in the glow of the lights, my childish glitter-covered bauble, Clarissa's porcelain ballerina, Felix's football ornament. They hung side by side. Relics of years when we were children and respect came naturally. I thought of my parents then. My mother's gentle hum as she baked, my father's booming voice as he raised his glass. To family, because without them, we're nothing. Tears welled in my eyes. But this time they weren't born of humiliation. They were of pride. I had done what they would have wanted. I had reclaimed the dignity of this house, the traditions they had left me. I had stood up and demanded the respect they had always taught me I deserved. I took a sip of wine, letting the warmth spread through me. The truth was, I knew my family might never look at me the same way again. Felix would brood, his pride smarting from being exposed. Clarissa would try to play the victim, twisting the story in her favor. The cousins would gossip, whispering about how Aunt Rowena pulled a stunt. But none of that mattered. For once, the weight of their opinions didn't press me down. I didn't need their approval anymore, because the toast had finally been answered, not by them, but by the lawyer who had raised his glass on my behalf, forcing them all to acknowledge what they had denied for so long. In that single moment, years of silence had shattered. I stood and carried my glass to the mantel, setting it beside my father's photograph. His eyes twinkled in the faded picture, his smile caught mid-laugh. I raised my glass once more, my voice steady. To family, I whispered. The family that sees me, the family that respects me. To you, Mom and Dad, for believing in me when no one else did. The glass clinked softly against the frame, and I felt their presence in the room, warm and proud. I sat back down, letting the glow of the tree bathe me in its light. The path forward wouldn't be easy, I knew that. Old habits don't die quickly, and pride like Felix's doesn't fade overnight. But the rules had changed. I had changed. And no matter how they tried to twist the story, they could never undo what had been spoken tonight. For years, they had ignored my voice. But now, they would never forget it. I finished the last sip of wine, feeling lighter than I had in decades. The lawyer's words echoed in my memory, his toast ringing clear, stronger than any silence they had ever given me. At Christmas, they ignored my toast, but when the lawyer raised his glass, they finally listened.